Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive deep into real stories from people who've seen things most of us can't even imagine. First responders, detectives, emergency workers, the people who pick up the phone when your world falls apart. Before we get into today's story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I promise you, the stories we cover here are the ones you won't find anywhere else. They're raw, they're real, and sometimes they're hard to believe, but every single one of them happened. And today's story? This one's going to stay with you. Now I have to warn you about something before we begin. This story involves themes that are genuinely disturbing. We're talking about kidnapping, human trafficking, and the kind of evil that hides behind white picket fences. If that's too much for you right now, I completely understand. Come back when you're ready. But if you're still here, I need you to pay close attention, because this isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about a desperate woman, an exhausted dispatcher, and a World War II code that saved a life. Every detail matters here, and by the end, you'll understand why the man telling this story no longer wears a badge. The man who shared this with me asked to remain anonymous, so we'll call him Mike. Mike spent 8 years as a 911 dispatcher in a mid-sized city somewhere in the Midwest. 8 years of hearing the worst moments of people's lives through a crackling phone line. He'd taken calls from mothers who found their children unresponsive. He'd talked suicidal teenagers down from bridges. He'd listened to gunshots in real time and sent officers to scenes knowing some of them wouldn't make it. Mike thought he'd heard it all. He thought nothing could shake him anymore. He was wrong. And the call that proved him wrong came on an ordinary Tuesday night, 15 minutes before his shift was supposed to end. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand something about 911 dispatchers. These are the people we never see. When you call for help, a dispatcher is your first lifeline. They're the calm voice asking for your location while you're screaming. They're the ones making split-second decisions about who gets help first. And they carry every single call with them, long after the line goes dead. Mike told me that most people burn out within 5 years. The turnover rate is brutal because the human brain isn't designed to absorb that much trauma. But Mike stayed. He stayed because he believed he was making a difference. That belief kept him going through the nightmares and the divorce and the drinking, until one call made him question everything. So here's what you need to know going in. One night, Mike received a call that was almost completely silent. No screaming, no crying, no words at all. Just an open line and a faint sound in the background. Most dispatchers would have marked it as a pocket dial and moved on. Mike almost did. But something made him pause. Something in that silence felt wrong, and when he listened closer, he heard it, a pattern. A rhythm that shouldn't have meant anything. But Mike had spent 4 years in the Army before becoming a dispatcher. He'd learned things that most people have forgotten exist. And in that moment, his past reached out and grabbed him by the throat. What he heard on that line was Morse code, tapped out desperately, slowly, on what turned out to be a metal pipe. 3 words that changed everything. Help, basement, 3 men. Now I want you to sit with that for a second. Imagine being trapped somewhere so hopeless that your only chance of survival is tapping a code from the 1800s and praying that whoever answers the phone happens to understand it. The odds of that working are almost zero. Almost. But a woman named Sarah Collins didn't have any other options. She'd been missing for 4 months. Her family had already held a memorial service, and she was tapping on a pipe with bloody fingernails, hoping someone would listen. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened that night, how Mike decoded the message in real time, how he convinced skeptical officers to check a house that looked completely normal, what they found in that basement, and why, just 3 weeks later, Mike turned in his badge and walked away from the only job he'd ever loved. This story has heroes and villains, but the lines aren't always clear. It has moments that will make you lose faith in humanity and moments that might just restore it. But more than anything, it has a lesson. A lesson about paying attention to the things that don't quite fit, The quiet signals that most of us ignore. I've taken thousands of calls in my career. Gunshots, overdoses, domestic disputes, car accidents, heart attacks, you name it, I've heard it. But this one I hear every time I close my eyes. It's been 2 years since that night, and I still can't listen to silence the same way. Every pause, every gap in a conversation, I'm waiting for a pattern, waiting for someone to reach out the only way they can. So let me take you back to that night. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of cold that sneaks through your jacket. I had 15 minutes left on my shift, a cup of bad coffee going cold on my desk, and no idea that my life was about to change forever. This is how it started. People ask me all the time what it's like to be a 911 dispatcher. They picture some calm person with a headset, typing on a computer, maybe drinking coffee between calls. And sure, sometimes it's like that. But what they don't understand is that you're the first voice people hear on the worst day of their lives. When someone's husband collapses in the kitchen, you're there. When a mother finds pills scattered on her teenager's floor, you're there. When someone's hiding in a closet while an intruder walks through their house, you're the voice whispering instructions, trying to keep them alive until help arrives. You don't get to see the ending. You just hear the beginning and the middle, and then the line goes dead, and you move on to the next call. That's the job. I'd been doing it for 8 years by the time this happened. 8 years of 12-hour shifts in a windowless room with 30 other dispatchers, all of us plugged into the worst moments happening across the city at any given second. You learn to compartmentalize. You learn to eat your lunch while someone's describing a car accident. You learn to sound calm when everything inside you is screaming. Some people think that makes us cold. Maybe it does. But if I fell apart every time I heard something terrible, I'd be useless. And being useless in this job means people die. So you build walls. You clock in, you do the work, you clock out, and you try not to bring it home with you. Before I became a dispatcher, I spent 4 years in the Army. Nothing glamorous. I was a communications specialist, which mostly meant sitting in rooms full of equipment, making sure people could talk to each other. But the Army taught me things. Discipline, mostly. How to stay calm when everything's chaos. And some skills that I figured I'd never use again once I got out. Morse code was one of them. We had to learn it as part of our training, even though nobody really uses it anymore. I remember thinking it was a waste of time. Just some relic from the past that the military kept around for tradition. I hadn't thought about Morse code in years. Funny how the things you think are useless turn out to be the things that matter most. That Tuesday started like any other shift. I got in around 6 in the evening, grabbed coffee from the break room, nodded at the people coming off day shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed the same way they always did. The chairs were the same uncomfortable plastic. The screens glowed with the same maps and call queues. Nothing felt different. Nothing felt special. I remember being tired. I'd been pulling extra shifts that month because we were short-staffed. My eyes burned. My back hurt from sitting. I kept looking at the clock, counting down the hours until I could go home, take a shower, and fall asleep in front of the TV. That was my whole plan for the night. The shift was busy but not crazy. A few car accidents, a domestic disturbance that turned out to be neighbors arguing about a fence, a kid who called 911 because his sister wouldn't share the remote. That last one sounds funny, but it happens more than you'd think. We get a lot of accidental calls, a lot of non-emergencies, a lot of people who just don't understand what 911 is for. You learn not to get annoyed. Every call could be real. Every call could be the one where someone actually needs you. So you treat them all the same until you know otherwise. That's the protocol. That's how you stay sharp. By 11:30, I was running on fumes. 15 minutes until my shift ended. I'd already mentally checked out, if I'm being honest. I was thinking about the leftover pizza in my fridge. I was thinking about whether I'd watch a movie or just go straight to bed. My replacement was already at the station, getting set up at the desk next to mine. All I had to do was finish out the clock and hand over. Easy. Routine. I'd done it 1,000 times before. And then my screen lit up with an incoming call. Unidentified number. No callback information. Just an open line. I almost didn't take it. 15 minutes. I was so close. But that's not how this works. You don't get to choose which calls you answer. So I clicked accept and said the same thing I'd said 10,000 times before. 911, what's your emergency? And I got nothing. Just silence. An open line with no voice on the other end. I waited a few seconds, repeated myself, waited again. Still nothing. This happens constantly. Pocket dials, kids playing with phones, people who hang up before you can answer. Protocol says you try to call back, and if you can't reach them, you log it and move on. That's what I was about to do. Log it, move on, go home, eat pizza. That was the plan. If I had clocked out 5 minutes earlier, Sarah Collins would be dead, and I wouldn't even know her name. I think about that all the time now. 5 minutes. 300 seconds. That's the margin between her being rescued and her being moved to God knows where, sold to God knows who, disappearing forever like so many others do. I didn't take that call because I'm a hero. I took it because I was too tired to get up and leave. Fate, luck, coincidence, call it whatever you want. But that's the truth. I was just a tired guy who didn't move fast enough. And because of that, everything changed. So there I was, headset on, staring at my screen, waiting for someone to say something. The line was open. I could tell because there was that faint static you get when a connection is live, but no voice. No breathing that I could make out. Nothing. I did what we always do. 911, what's your emergency? Waited. Hello? Is someone there? Do you need help? Still nothing. I was about to mark it as an abandoned call and move on. My finger was literally hovering over the button, but something made me hesitate. I don't know what it was. Instinct, maybe. Or just the fact that I was too tired to move quickly. Either way, I kept the line open for a few more seconds. And that's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was interference. You know how phone lines sometimes pick up weird noises? Clicks, static, echoes from other calls. It happens. So when I heard this faint tapping sound, my first thought was technical glitch. Maybe a bad connection. Maybe the caller's phone was in a pocket, bumping against keys or coins. I almost ignored it completely. But the sound kept going. Tap, 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 tap. It was faint, metallic, like someone hitting a pipe or a railing. Rhythmic but not steady. It would start, then stop, then start again. I figured maybe it was a kid messing around. Maybe someone's phone fell near some machinery. My brain was giving me every mundane explanation it could find. But here's the thing about being a dispatcher for 8 years. You develop a sense for when something's off. It's not anything mystical. It's just pattern recognition. You hear thousands of calls, and your brain starts to notice when something doesn't fit the usual categories. And this sound, this tapping, it didn't fit. It wasn't random enough to be accidental noise, but it wasn't regular enough to be a machine or a heartbeat or anything mechanical. It had pauses in weird places, clusters of taps, then gaps, then more clusters. Like someone was thinking between each sequence, like there was intention behind it. That's when my brain started to wake up. Something about that pattern felt deliberate. I turned up my headset volume as high as it would go, pressed the earpiece harder against my head. The tapping was so faint I could barely make it out over the ambient noise of the dispatch center. But it was there. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, pause. Tap, tap, tap. I started counting the taps, trying to figure out what I was hearing. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a door opened. A door I hadn't walked through in over a decade. I was back in an army training room, bored out of my mind, listening to an instructor explain a communication system that nobody used anymore. A system of dots and dashes, short and long signals. I remember thinking this is pointless. When am I ever going to need this? Turns out the answer was, on a random Tuesday, 15 minutes before going home. My hands started shaking a little. I grabbed a pen and a scrap of paper from my desk. I needed to write this down because I wasn't sure I was hearing what I thought I was hearing. Tap, tap, tap. That's 3 short. That's an S, then a pause, then one long tap. No wait, that's a T. I was rusty. I hadn't done this in years. The taps were slow, uneven, hard to distinguish. Whoever was making them wasn't a pro, but they were trying. God, they were trying so hard. I wrote down what I could, second-guessing myself the whole time. My coworker at the next desk looked over and asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too focused on the sounds coming through my headset. The tapping stopped for almost 30 seconds. I thought I'd lost them. I thought maybe it was nothing after all, just my tired brain playing tricks on me, finding patterns in random noise. I was about to give up, and then it started again. Slower this time, more deliberate. Like whoever was doing it knew this might be their last chance. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. 3 shorts, 3 shorts, 3 shorts. Even with my rusty memory, I knew that one. Everyone knows that one, even if they don't realize it. That's SOS, the universal distress signal. Someone on the other end of this silent call was tapping out SOS on a piece of metal, and suddenly I wasn't tired anymore. I've never felt anything like what I felt in that moment. It was like ice water in my veins. Like every cell in my body woke up at once, because I realized this wasn't a pocket dial. This wasn't a prank. Someone was in trouble, serious trouble, and they couldn't speak. They couldn't scream for help. All they could do was tap on something and hope that whoever answered the phone would understand. The odds of that are astronomical. You'd have to reach a dispatcher who not only kept the line open long enough to hear the tapping, but who also happened to know Morse code. In 2024, when nobody uses Morse code for anything, it was almost impossible. Almost. I grabbed every piece of paper I could find on my desk. Old call logs, sticky notes, the back of a coffee-stained memo. I needed to write this down because my hands were shaking and my memory was failing me. Morse code has a rhythm to it. Dots are short taps, dashes are longer ones. The gaps between letters are longer than the gaps between taps within a letter. But this person wasn't a professional. Their timing was off, their taps were uneven, and sometimes I couldn't tell where one letter ended and another began. I was decoding in real time, trying to remember a skill I hadn't used since I was 23 years old. Every second felt like an hour. Every tap felt like a heartbeat. I kept thinking, don't mess this up. Don't miss something. This matters. The first word came together slowly. 4 short taps. That's H1 tap. That's E dot dash dot dot. That's L dot dash dash dot. That's P help. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't noise. Someone was spelling out the word help, one agonizing letter at a time, tapping on metal with God knows what. A ring? A fingernail? I didn't know yet. All I knew was that this was real, and I was the only person in the world who was listening. My coworker asked me again if I was okay. I held up my hand to silence him. I couldn't explain. I couldn't take my focus off the line for even a second. After help, there was a long pause. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe that was all they could manage. But then the tapping started again. Slower this time, like the person was exhausted. Or maybe they were being careful not to make too much noise. I wrote down each tap as it came. Dash dot dot dot, B dot dash, A dot dot, S dot, E dash dot. Wait, no, that's not right. I scratched it out, started over. The letters were getting harder to distinguish. My hands were sweating. I pressed the headset so hard against my ear that it hurt. Finally, I got it. B-A-C-M-E-N-T. Basement. Help. Basement. Someone was trapped in a basement and calling for help. The tapping stopped again. Longer this time, maybe 45 seconds. I held my breath. Part of me was praying for more information. An address, a name, anything. Part of me was already trying to figure out how I was going to explain this to my supervisor. I could imagine the conversation. Hey, I got a silent call with some tapping that I think might be Morse code. Can we send a unit? They'd think I was crazy. They'd think I was overtired and hearing things. But then the tapping started one more time, and what came next made everything clear. 3 taps. Dash, dash, dash. Dash, dash, dash. Wait, no. Let me focus. 3 short taps, then a pause, then. I wrote it down, rewrote it, finally got it. The number 3. Then, me and 3 men. The complete message was now on my paper, written in my shaky handwriting. Help, basement, 3 men. I stared at it for what felt like forever. Someone was trapped in a basement with 3 men. They had access to a phone but couldn't speak. They were tapping out a message in a code that almost nobody knows anymore. The only explanation that made sense was the one I didn't want to believe. This was a kidnapping. This was human trafficking. This was something horrible happening right now, in real time, while I sat in my fluorescent-lit office with my cold coffee and my aching back. And I was the only person who knew. I made a decision. I didn't have an address. Well, I had one. The system had logged an approximate location based on the cell signal. It wasn't precise, but it gave me a street, a neighborhood, a house. I could dispatch units to check it out. But here's the thing, I had no verbal confirmation. No screaming, no crying, no please help me. Just tapping. If I was wrong, I'd be sending officers to harass some innocent family based on a hunch. My supervisor would chew me out. There might be a complaint. It could affect my record. I thought about all of that for maybe 2 seconds. Then I thought about the person on the other end of that line, tapping until their fingers bled. There was no choice. Not really. I flagged my supervisor. Told him I had a priority call, possible kidnapping, needed units immediately. He looked at me like I was insane. You have a silent call, he said. That's not priority. I told him about the tapping, about the Morse code, about help basement 3 men. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see him calculating the risks. If I was right, we'd save someone. If I was wrong, we'd have some explaining to do. He made the call, literally. 2 units dispatched to the address the system had logged. A house on Ridgewood Drive, quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. I stayed on the line, listening to silence, praying I wasn't too late. The 2 units arrived at Ridgewood Drive about 12 minutes after I made the call. 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. I stayed on the line the whole time, but the tapping had stopped. Complete silence now. I didn't know if that was good or bad. Maybe she heard the sirens and stopped to avoid alerting her captors. Maybe she'd been caught. Maybe she'd given up. I had no way of knowing. All I could do was sit there, headset pressed to my ear, staring at nothing, while the officers approached the house. I listened to their radio chatter. Dispatch, we're on scene. Single-family home, well-maintained, lights on inside. No signs of disturbance. That's what they said. No signs of disturbance. Everything looked normal. The house was exactly what you'd picture when someone says suburban America. 2 stories, white siding, neatly trimmed lawn. There was a welcome mat at the front door and flower pots on the porch. One of the officers told me later that there was a kid's bicycle leaning against the garage, though it turned out no children lived there. It was just for show. Everything about that house was designed to look safe, friendly, forgettable. The kind of place you drive past 1,000 times without ever wondering what happened inside. The kind of place where neighbors wave at each other and nobody asks too many questions. That's what makes it so terrifying looking back. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like a house with a welcome mat. A woman answered the door. Mid-40s, friendly face, wearing an apron like she'd been in the middle of cooking dinner. She smiled at the officers, asked if everything was okay. They explained they'd received a 911 call from this address and were just checking to make sure everyone was safe. She laughed, actually laughed, and said there must be some mistake. I didn't call 911, she said. Maybe it was a wrong number? These things happen, right? She was calm, polite, cooperative. She offered to show them her phone to prove she hadn't made any calls. One of the officers told me later that he almost believed her. She was that convincing. I was listening to all of this through the radio, and my heart was sinking. The officers were buying it. I could hear it in their voices. The tension was leaving. The urgency was fading. They were about to thank her for her time, apologize for the inconvenience, and leave. That's standard procedure when there's no evidence of a problem. You can't force your way into someone's home just because a dispatcher has a hunch. We have rules. We have laws. And this woman was saying all the right things. I grabbed my radio and did something I'd never done before in 8 years on the job. I interrupted. "Officers, this is dispatch. Please request access to the basement." Repeat. "Request access to the basement." There was a pause on the radio. I could imagine the officers exchanging looks. This was weird. Dispatchers don't make requests like that. We provide information. We don't give tactical suggestions. But something in my voice must have gotten through because one of them keyed his radio and said, "Copy, dispatch. Stand by." I heard him turn back to the woman. "Ma'am, would you mind if we took a quick look around?" Just to be thorough. And that's when everything changed. The woman's smile didn't disappear, but something behind it shifted. Just for a second. A flicker in her eyes. A tension in her jaw. The officer noticed. His partner noticed. They'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when someone's mask slips. She said no. Politely, of course. "I really don't think that's necessary, officers. It's late, and my husband is sleeping. I'd hate to disturb him over a wrong number." But the officers weren't backing down now. They'd seen that flicker. One of them asked again, more firmly this time. "Ma'am, we just need to take a quick look and we'll be out of your way." She started to protest, started to say something about rights and warrants, but her voice was different now, higher, faster. The friendly neighbor routine was cracking. And then, from somewhere inside the house, there was a sound. Faint, barely audible. A thump, like something hitting a pipe. The officers heard it. The woman's face went pale. Everything happened fast after that. One officer requested backup while the other kept the woman talking. She was getting agitated now, insisting they had no right to enter, threatening to call her lawyer. But her hands were shaking. Her eyes kept darting toward a door at the back of the hallway. More thumping from below. Louder now. Desperate. The officer told her they had probable cause, the 911 call, the sounds from inside, and they were entering the home. She tried to block them, actually physically tried to stop them from moving forward. That's when they detained her, cuffed her right there in the hallway of her perfect suburban home with the flower pots on the porch and the welcome mat at the door. And then they went downstairs. The officers told me later they were about to leave. The woman was calm, polite, completely believable. She had an answer for everything. If I hadn't said something, if I hadn't insisted they check the basement, they would have apologized for bothering her and driven away. And Sarah Collins would still be down there. Or worse, she'd be gone. Moved, sold, vanished. Here's the thing about evil. It smiles at you. It offers you coffee. It wears an apron and laughs at the silly misunderstanding. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in so well that you'd never know it was there. That's what keeps me up at night now. How many times did I believe the smile? The basement door was locked from the outside. 3 deadbolts, industrial grade, the kind you'd use on a storage facility or a warehouse. Not the kind you put on a door inside your own home. The officers had to break through, and even then it took effort. The woman in handcuffs was screaming now. Not words, just noise, like an animal caught in a trap. One officer stayed with her while the other went down the stairs. He told me later that the smell hit him first. Mildew, sweat, something worse. The basement was dark. He had to use his flashlight. And what that beam of light revealed is something that still makes him sick to talk about. A room that was never meant to be found. It wasn't a basement anymore. Someone had converted it into a makeshift cell. The windows had been bricked over from the inside. The walls were covered with soundproofing foam, the cheap kind you can buy at any hardware store. There was a mattress on the floor, stained and thin, a bucket in the corner, a chain bolted to the wall, and at the end of that chain, curled up against a water pipe, was a woman, young, thin, barely recognizable as human in the dim light. Her clothes were torn, her hair was matted, and her fingers, God, Her fingers were pressed against the pipe, still tapping. Even as the flashlight hit her face, she was still tapping. She didn't know help had arrived. She just kept going. Her name was Sarah Collins, 23 years old, nursing student at the state university about 40 miles away. She'd been reported missing 4 months earlier after she didn't come home from a late-night study session at the library. Her car was found abandoned in a parking garage. No witnesses. No leads. The police had investigated, of course, but the trail went cold fast. Her family held a memorial service after 2 months. Not a funeral, they didn't have a body, but a service to say goodbye. Her mother spoke about how Sarah always wanted to help people, how she'd chosen nursing because she couldn't stand to see anyone suffer. Her little brother read a poem. Everyone cried. Everyone moved on. Everyone except Sarah, who was still alive, 40 miles away, chained to a pipe in a suburban basement. The officer who found her said she didn't scream when she saw him, didn't cry, didn't say a word. She just stopped tapping and looked up at him with these eyes that he couldn't describe. Empty and full at the same time, he said. Like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Like she'd imagined rescue so many times that she couldn't trust it was real. He knelt down next to her and said, "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." And that's when she finally broke. Not screaming, not dramatic, just this quiet sob that came from somewhere so deep it didn't even sound human. She grabbed his arm and wouldn't let go, held on so tight she left bruises. He didn't mind. Next to the mattress, the officers found a small pile of items, a plastic cup, a torn blanket, a few pieces of bread wrapped in napkins, and a book. Old, water-damaged, with a faded cover showing a campfire and boys in uniform. A scout handbook from the 1970s. Someone had probably donated it to a thrift store decades ago, and somehow it ended up in that basement. Maybe the captors used it to start fires. Maybe they thought it would keep her quiet. Whatever the reason, they'd left it there. And Sarah had read it. Every page. Every chapter. Including the one about emergency communication. Including the section on Morse code. The pages were wrinkled from being handled so many times. Some of the letters were traced over in what looked like blood. 3 men were arrested that night. The woman's husband was one of them. He'd been upstairs the whole time, hiding in a bedroom, pretending to be asleep. The other 2 were found in a van parked behind the house, apparently waiting to transport Sarah to another location. They were part of a trafficking ring that operated across 3 states. Sarah wasn't their first victim. She was just the first one who got away. The investigation that followed would uncover 4 other women who'd been moved through that house over the previous 2 years. 2 of them were never found. The other 2 were recovered alive, thanks to information Sarah provided. She saved them. Even after everything she'd been through, she helped save them. The details that came out in the trial were hard to hear. I won't share most of them here because they're not mine to share, and because some things don't need to be repeated. But I'll tell you this. Sarah Collins spent 4 months in that basement. 4 months without sunlight. 4 months of things I can't even imagine. And instead of giving up, instead of letting the darkness win, she taught herself a language. Dot by dot, dash by dash. She practiced on that pipe until she had it memorized. She waited for her chance. And when she finally heard someone upstairs making a phone call, she took it. She had no idea if anyone would hear. She had no idea if anyone would understand, but she tapped anyway, because hope is sometimes all you have. She learned Morse code from a book they accidentally left behind, a book about camping and knots and building fires. A chapter she must have read hundreds of times in the dark, tracing the letters with her fingers, memorizing the patterns. And when she finally got a chance, when she heard the phone upstairs being used, she gambled everything on someone understanding. The odds were almost 0. She had no way of knowing that the dispatcher on the other end had spent 4 years in the Army. She had no way of knowing he'd learned Morse code in a training room 15 years earlier. She just had to hope. And somehow, against all odds, hope was enough. In the days after Sarah was rescued, I became something of a local hero. The department gave me a commendation. My supervisor shook my hand and told reporters I was a credit to the profession. There were interviews, news segments, people stopping me in the grocery store to say they'd seen me on TV. Everyone wanted to talk about the dispatcher who knew Morse code, the miracle of the silent call, the girl who was saved against all odds. And I smiled and nodded and said all the right things because that's what you're supposed to do. But inside, something was breaking. Something I couldn't explain to anyone. Because while everyone else saw a happy ending, I saw something different. I saw how close it came to not happening at all. The first week back at work, I couldn't focus. Every call that came in, I listened harder than I ever had before. Silent calls that I would have dismissed without a second thought, I kept them open. Listened for patterns. Listened for tapping, breathing, anything that might mean something. My coworkers thought I was being thorough. My supervisor thought I was riding high on the attention. But the truth was, I was terrified. Because I kept thinking about all the silent calls I'd taken in 8 years. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands, maybe. And I dismissed almost all of them without a second thought. Pocket dials. Wrong numbers. Kids playing with phones. That's what I told myself. That's what we all told ourselves. But how many of them weren't? That question started eating at me. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up and stare at the ceiling, running through old calls in my head. The hang-ups. The open lines with nothing but static. The ones I logged as abandoned and forgot about before my shift even ended. How many Sarahs were on the other end of those calls? How many people were trying to reach out, trying to send a signal, and I just wasn't paying attention? I know that's not rational. I know I couldn't have known. But trauma doesn't care about logic. Guilt doesn't care about statistics. All I could think about was the ones I might have missed. The ones who didn't get lucky. 3 weeks after Sarah's rescue, I requested a leave of absence. I told my supervisor I needed time to decompress, and he understood. Everyone understood. What I didn't tell him was that I wasn't coming back. I couldn't. Every time I put on that headset, I felt like I was holding someone's life in my hands and I wasn't strong enough to carry it anymore. The weight of the what-ifs was crushing me. Not the trauma of what I'd heard. I could handle that. I'd handled worse over 8 years. It was the uncertainty. The knowledge that no matter how hard I listened, I could still miss something. Someone could still slip through the cracks, and I'd never even know. I handed in my resignation on a Tuesday morning, same day of the week as the call. My supervisor tried to talk me out of it, offered me a desk job, administrative work, anything to keep me on the team. But I was done. I packed up my desk, the coffee mug, the photos, the little stress balls someone had given me as a joke years ago, and I walked out of that building for the last time. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive away. 8 years. 8 years of my life ended because a woman I'd never met taught herself Morse code in a basement. I saved her life, and she ended my career. I don't say that with resentment. I say it because it's the truth. Some things change you in ways you can't undo. I've had a lot of time to think since then. About Sarah, about the call, about what it all means. People ask me if I'm proud of what I did, and I never know how to answer. I didn't do anything special. I answered a phone. I happen to know something most people don't. I made a call that could have easily gone the other way. If I'd been 5 minutes faster leaving work, I wouldn't have been there. If I'd been born 10 years later, I probably wouldn't have learned Morse code. If Sarah's captors hadn't left that book behind, she wouldn't have known how to signal. The whole thing was a chain of coincidences so unlikely that it shouldn't have worked, but it did, and I can't take credit for luck. What I can do is tell this story, not so people think I'm a hero. I'm not. Not so people feel sorry for me. I don't need that either. I tell this story because Sarah Collins fought for 4 months in the dark with nothing but a book and her fingernails, and she deserves to be remembered for that. I tell it because there are people right now, at this very moment, who are trying to send a signal. Maybe not in Morse code. Maybe it's a text that seems off, a social media post that doesn't quite fit, a friend who's quieter than usual. The signals are there if we pay attention. Most of the time, we don't. We're too busy, too distracted, too convinced that bad things only happen to other people. But they don't. They happen to everyone. And sometimes, the only thing standing between someone and the worst moment of their life is another person who notices. I'm not telling you this story so you think I'm a hero. I'm not one. I'm a guy who got lucky, who happened to have the right skill at the right time, who almost didn't answer the phone. I'm telling you this because Sarah Collins spent 4 months in hell and never stopped fighting. She taught herself a dead language from a children's book. She tapped on a pipe until her fingers bled. She bet everything on a stranger hearing her, understanding her, believing her. The least we can do, the very least, is listen. Pay attention to the quiet signals, the ones that don't make sense, the ones that seem like nothing, because sometimes nothing is everything. Sometimes silence is a scream. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And next time your phone picks up a silent call, or you notice something that doesn't quite fit, just listen for a second longer. You might be the only one who does.